Hopefully you can see that all.
Certainly can. So I'll leave you to do a self-introduction, and thanks for stepping in.
Thank you very much, Mike. And Alistair does extend his apologies for not being able to make it today. As Mike noted, he's a bit all over the place at the moment. And apologies if this comes across as unrehearsed, because it is. I'm sure I know some of you, but my name is Bas Edmonds. I work for HPI Verification Services as the Director of Marine Services. On the agenda, we're going to talk about the UK regulations post-Brexit, some of the cross-channel trade of used boats, and then dive into some issues that we see coming up, or we anticipate are going to coming up more and more regularly in the future, and where there may be overlap with marine surveyors, which is primarily around major craft conversion and post-construction assessments, and then move into RCR and RCD and commercial craft before giving the opportunity to grill around some of the topics I've talked about today. So in terms of who we are three different bodies. So starting off with HPI VS UK, so we're in a UK approved body with an approved body number of 1521. Within that company, we're licensed or approved by UCAS and BAYS to carry out certification under the pressure equipment regulations of PED, recreational craft regulations, and the safety of machinery regulations. And we're accredited by UCAS under 4 different ISO standards for that. And that allows us to apply the UK CA mark. We also have an Irish company. So again, we'll be an EU notified body under the Pressure Equipment Directive and the Recreational Craft Directive, and we're accredited by INAB again under those 4 different ISO accreditation standards. And then there's a third part to us, which I think some of you aren't aware of, but certainly we've separated this out from the company purely because we see as a benefit sometimes to surveyors, but certainly to our clients in terms of manufacturing, which is we have a third company called rulefinder.net, under which we have compliance software tools, which are the tools we use to build up the technical file for manufacturers going forwards. It's also a website which allows you online access to ISO standards, legislation, and guidelines. So some of you may be aware of the RWA's RCD web. So it's similar to that. We're licensed by British standards, but it also includes all of the European directives, the RFUs and the RSG interpretations as well. So there's a lot more that comes into that. And what I've found certainly since I've joined HPI is that there's an awful lot more in the background about how a essential requirement or how one of the regulations is actually to be applied going forward. So I'll touch on that when we get to the major craft conversions. And as I said, we're licensed by BSI under that. So there's 3 different elements of the company, depending on which area we're wanting to certificate or regulate into. So I'm going to start off by talking about the UK craft regulations. So the EU, as it was before we left, it's governed by the Commission. So it's the Department for Growth in the Commission that deals with the Recreational Craft Directive. They appoint notified bodies via and apply harmonised standards to deliver the essential requirements of that directive to apply a CE mark going forwards. On the UK side, it's supported by the government, so BAYS, Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It's under the UK side, we're an approved body, so slightly different terminology. We work with designated standards and we apply a UK CA mark. In reality, whilst they have changed some terminology and some things like notified body and approved body, the UK have verbatim copied all of the directive, the Recreational Craft Directive, into the Recreational Craft Regulations under SI 2017-737. So it's a straight copy, so there's no real differences at the moment between those 2 directives. So the UK government is essentially copying everything that Europe's doing going forwards. So transition from CE to UK CA marking. So it's been a bit of a moving target. For those of you who've been following the industry news coming out from British Marine or the government about how they were applying Brexit, it has been a bit of a moving target. So the deadline for application of the UK CA mark, where it becomes mandatory and they will no longer accept this CE mark in the UK, has been extended several times. It was extended on the 11th of November last year, where they announced the acceptance of CE marks all the way up until 2025. So if you're an importer of a European importer bringing boats into the UK, the CE mark applied by a European manufacturer or a European notified body is still accepted in the UK for another couple of years. It has pulled the rug out a little bit from the business that we've set up, but we're finding that UK manufacturers still want to have a UK mark on their products, so it's still something that we're working around. The reason why they've done that is because whilst the marine industry is one part, there are quite a few other sectors of industry where the UK regulations, where they don't have a UK certifier in place yet, that some parts of industry, like HPI as an example, we set ourselves up, we created the opportunities to support the UK industry whilst maintaining a foothold in the European side going forwards. But some sectors of industry haven't responded as quickly, which is why the UK government are under pressure from UK manufacturers to continue to extend that deadline going forwards. So as it stands at the moment, the CE mark is a valid demonstration of compliance with the UK recreational craft regulations. Cross-channel trade of used boats. The next sector. So in terms of where we stand at the moment, so the UK-EU trade agreement applies only to new products, as second-hand goods fall under the Treaty of Lisbon. So effectively what it means is that the UK is really kind of, as the slide says, was expunged from product history in terms of the EU's perspective. The reality of that means any boat going from the UK to the EU must be freshly certified, even if it's already CE marked and even if it was built in the EU. What we're noticing is that whilst that is the law at the moment, we're not seeing that being wholesale applied. We're not actually seeing it being applied very often at all. So I think if anyone's got any feedback where they've had a client or a customer taking a boat back into the EU where any regulator over in Europe is asking for it to be recertified despite the fact it's got a CE mark, would be quite interested to hear about it, because certainly it's not coming, we're not seeing that coming back to us at the moment. And as the final point says, the EU doesn't appear to recognise any previous service in Europe at the moment, but that's what they're doing in law. In practice, we're seeing a slight difference on that. The next part I really wanted to talk about was around major craft conversions. Alistair's put an abbreviation warning here. So we've got a number here, which I'll run through. Oh, too far. So major craft conversion is MCC within the regulations. PCA is post-construction assessment. The RSG is the Recreational Craft Sectoral Group. It's a EU notified bodies forum which meets every year to discuss interpretation, allow for consistent application of the Recreational Craft Directive. There is a similar UK body set up at the moment, of which IMSI and HPI are the two notified bodies that attend, and there's other industry representatives that attend those meetings as well. An RFU is a recommendation for use. So it's a guideline issued by the RSG in response to a formal question. And this is why HPI is still a European notified body, because we get a stronger discussion and we get a stronger application of the standards by asking questions in the European forum than we do in the UK at the moment, purely because there's only 2 notified bodies versus 20 odd notified bodies in the EU. And finally, ICE is internal combustion engine. So a major craft conversion is equal to or equals the requirements for a post-construction assessment. So RCD scope Article 2 includes craft that are subject to an MCC, a major craft conversion. Article 19 obliges that a post-construction assessment after a major craft conversion has to take place. Unfortunately, there's no useful definition of a major craft conversion, but there is a definition of a major engine conversion, which is a change of propulsion, which would be a change, which would therefore lead into a major craft conversion as well. So hence, when we talk about electrification in the next couple of slides, it does give us some clarity as to what a major craft conversion is in certain instances. It's the owner's responsibility to determine whether a major craft conversion has taken place and whether therefore the vessel needs a PCA. There is an RFU that says that effectively, if the owner determines that none of the essential requirements have been detrimentally affected in terms of the boat's safety, then by doing a risk assessment and determining that outcome, they don't necessarily need to go down the post-construction assessment route. So it is the owner or the duty holder is responsible for the decision of whether a major craft conversion has taken place and whether that vessel needs to undergo a post-construction assessment. One useful element that the RSG has ruled is that the post-construction assessment after a major craft conversion should be proportionate. So the assessment should only look at the impact of the modification. So when we talk about things like electrification, which I'm going to come on to, if the black water systems haven't been affected by the removal of an internal combustion engine and the replacement with batteries and an electric motor, then we wouldn't need to look at that. It would need to be proportionate. Similarly, we've recently done a major craft conversion and a post-construction assessment where the engine taken out, the battery and the motor put in was in virtually the same place and within 10 kilos of the engine that was taken out. And we didn't think, therefore, that the stability would be negatively affected, and we didn't go down the route of reassessing the stability for the boat as well. So it's about proportionality, not making sure, not reassessing the whole boat, but just the elements or the essential safety requirements that have been amended as by the major craft conversion.
Baz, can I just ask a question on that? So we're all sort of in the room looking at each other incredulous, wondering what happens. So if somebody has an MCC and decides that in their opinion it isn't an MCC, are there any punishments or penalties? How does that work?
No, it basically would work through the process that it's like most things, Mike. If something goes wrong, then the owner gets caught out. If the boat gets sold, there are descriptors on the RCD certificate or the RCR certificate, such as it's a cruising craft planing with an inboard conventional shaft propeller engine. If any of those elements change in terms of the key principles of the vessel change, then the certificate may be invalid and it would need to go through a PCA and recertification. So the owner can look at it in terms of have they negatively affected the safety of the vessel, but there are other elements that if they significantly change the boat, as I said, a major engine conversion is considered a major craft conversion and would need a PCA automatically.
Okay, thanks.
So in terms of electrification, as I said, we would see that as a major craft conversion, and we would expect it to go through a post-construction assessment, because you're changing the method of propulsion, you're changing the parameters on which the boat and the declaration of conformity has been assessed, and therefore the post-construction assessment is required at that point. What we're looking at, again, from a proportional element, is the safe removal of the engine. What was taken out of the boat? Are the fuel tanks being removed, or are they just blanked off and are still in place? So what was there? What's been taken out, and how has that been done? Then we'd start to go through what are the new components. So does the electric motor have certification elements to it as well? Are they certified? Are they CE marked or UKCA marked? Does the battery systems, do they meet certain technical standards? And and generally looking at the safety of the system that combines those components together. So in some parts, we're working with manufacturers at the moment, where we're pre-approving the components, the standard components that they'd put in as part of that electrification, and then looking at the systems that connect those pre-approved components. We look at things like change in stability. Has the CEG and the VCG of the boat, the vessel been amended by the removal of the engine? Have they put in, taken the fuel tank out? Yes. They have how many batteries have they put in? Where are those batteries? And therefore, has the stability been changed? And do we need to do a reassessment of that? Water tightness. So there's, with an ICE, there's normally through hull fittings. How have they been taken care of? How are they blanked? Are there any new through hull fittings due to the electric motor that's going in, or are they using existing fittings as part of that? And when you're cutting holes in the bottom of the boat, how is that structure being assessed in terms of what was there originally, and how is that has that affected any of the essential requirements? And then the final part, which is probably the bit that is quite often overlooked, is because the owner's manual now references or did reference an internal combustion engine which no longer exists on the boat. There needs to be an amendment to the owner's manual, and that could simply be by inputting or referring to the electric propulsion manual, system manual that comes with the system that you've purchased as well. But that needs to be amended to reflect the change in systems on board. There are other elements that, if it's a standalone system and doesn't integrate into the domestic electrical system on board, then there's less we'd have to do. But if it is fully integrated into the existing system, we'd need to have a look at, do the conductors table of the owner's manual, is that the same? And are there more amendments needed going forward, and are there more checks needed going forward, depending on how the system is integrated in? On Monday, I was looking at two different boats. So there was a little westerly, which has had the engine taken out, little electric motor put in, batteries where the fuel tank was, not integrated into the domestic system at all, and therefore very, very simple to look at in terms of, we've got pre-approved components in a standard way. The only additional element is around shore charging capabilities and how that's integrated into the boat. But other than that, very, very simple. The second one was a Sudley 47, sorry, where the owner had taken out the engine and put in a new genset, a whole new batteries, reintegrated that into the whole vessel's electrical system. So he's got a 48 watt propulsion system, a 12 and a 5 watt bow thruster and stern thruster with their own battery systems, and a whole charging system that supports all three different electrical systems. So that's going to be quite a complex job going forwards. So it varies very much on the type of work that that has been undertaken by the owner or by their representatives.
Baz, can I ask a question? I don't want to ask a question. Actually, Graham would like to ask a question. And if you can hear him.
Just a quick clarification, actually, Baz. The slide you've just gone through, electrification equals MCC, I understand that. But what I may have misunderstood on the previous slide, you said you had a scenario where an ICE was removed, but an electric motor was put in, but it was within 10 kilos, so you need to do an MCC or a PCA. Can you just clarify those two examples? Have I missed the first one?
Yeah, thank you, Graham, for the question. I apologise if I was slightly confusing on that. What I was talking about was proportionality at the time. So when I said the 10 kilos, it was effectively the system that had been taken out and the system that had been put back in was within the same area of the boat and within 10 kilos. The new system was within 10 kilos of the original propulsion system on board. And in terms of proportionality, we assessed that we wouldn't need to go through a reassessment of the stability going forwards.
The stability, just the stability. Okay, right. Okay.
Thanks, Baz.
Yeah.
Thank you. Apologies if that wasn't clear, but it was more about the proportionality side. So examples, I think I'd probably just cover this, to be honest. It's the beauty of having a presentation that you didn't know what's coming up sometimes. So again, from the electrification side, we talked about roughly, where we think the changes are and what the work would be doing in terms of that. The other element where we see post-constructions assessment or a major craft conversion would be if you buy a sail away boat, such as an inland waterways boat, which is incomplete when sold but navigable. If the owner has added systems onto that, so what we see quite often is you'll buy an inland waterways vessel but without any gas systems on board. If the owner then adds an LPG system, that is likely to be a major craft conversion because there was nothing in the original certification, nothing in the original DOC or owner's manual about the LPG system. As it's completed, that work would need to be assessed, making sure that it's in compliance with the ISO and the essential requirements, add the section to the owner's manual, and issue a post-construction assessment because of the amendments the owner's done by completing that boat. So those are the kind of the two main examples that we see in terms of post-construction assessment or a major craft conversion. How brokers, surveyors and notified bodies or approved bodies work together. So where surveyors get involved, they have an oath to ensure that a boat is safe and that the user is aware of its limitations. So even if the owner wishes to ignore the surveyor's report, you as surveyors would give all of the information that the owner needs to understand the condition of their vessel. A notified body is slightly different, so we're not permitted to go beyond proportionate, so there's no obligation to maintain a boat to RCD standards. The RCD and the RCR, unfortunately, is the bottom rung of safety, and we can't refuse to issue a PCA certificate if there is a problem unrelated to the major craft conversion. But there is a duty of care to inform. So if we do see something that we have a concern about, we would let the owner know, but we wouldn't be able to refuse certification. And that's, I think, the key difference between the surveyors and a notified body is that we're providing the service that we're contracted. You're providing the service you're contracted to do, but the services are slightly different in how we work. We work to the ISOs and the essential safety requirements, and if it meets those, we can't go above and beyond that. We can only inform that we feel there may be issues with the vessel going forwards. The opportunities that we see coming up between notified bodies or approved bodies and surveyors. So a PCA requires a physical inspection. We're not permitted to do it remotely. We have to see a boat when it's going through a post-construction assessment. We also believe that the process of electrification may greatly increase our workload going forward, or any notified body's workload, as the demand for post-construction assessments goes up and as the awareness for the requirement of a post-construction assessment goes up as well. So we believe that there is going to be a significant increase in work over the next 5 years of more post-construction assessments due to the electrification of existing vessels. Post-construction assessment is an in-service survey, so it's very much suited to the surveyor's skill set. So we very much believe that collaboration between surveyors and notified bodies is something that we would look at and welcome very much working forwards. But it does require surveyors to understand the limits of the notified body's remit. So we are not necessarily the arbitrators of safety. We are there to apply the ISOs. We are there to apply a proportional assessment of the modifications that are being carried out and certificate about if it meets the essential safety requirements and the ISOs and the work has gone out. So what we don't do is the safest possible solution. We just look at the regulations and apply that going forward. So that there is, as I said in the previous slide, there is a slight difference in how surveyors approach their work and notified bodies and we approach our work. But we very much would welcome the collaboration if there is that understanding of the limit of the limitation of the remit between those two different types of services. In terms of RCD and commercial craft, I'm sure you're all aware that the RCD excludes commercial craft from within its scope, except when it's being used for recreation. There is no EU directive at the moment for commercial craft. When I was in my previous role at the MCA, there was discussion about a certain number of countries trying to write one single commercial code, or a code for commercial craft. I don't think that had much appetite, to be honest. And so there is no EU directive for commercial craft. Each country is free to apply its own rules. But what we are starting to see is many European countries' commercial regulations start by asking for RCD compliance as part of that commercial certification going forwards. So we're seeing countries recognizing that RCD compliance is a good starting point for certain types of boats going forwards. And it's mostly the recreational side rather than the workboat side. So what does that inspection look like? It's a third-party inspection within the RCD. There are a number of different modules that we can apply, modules of assessment. So module A, mostly category C or D boats under 12 meters. It's manufacturer declared, and there's no third-party involvement. It's the manufacturer just saying they've built the boat in compliance, and they issue their own DOC and their own certification. Module A1 is where the stability and the buoyancy is assessed by a certifier or a notified body, and then the manufacturer takes responsibility for all other components or all other parts of compliance against the essential safety requirements. So as a notified body, we would only look at the stability and buoyancy. And again, that's Cat C and design category C and D up to 12 meters. And sorry, A, B, C and D up to 12 meters. Or any length under 12 meters for them. Module B is, so module A1 is probably about 50% of our work. Module B is close to the other 50%, where it's a type examination of the full scope of the RCD. So that's where we as a notified body would go in, have a look at all of the essential safety requirements of the RCD or the RCR. Assess the boat, normally in build, twice in build, once when finished, carry out a stability assessment, and then issue a type examination for that design type, so a certification for that design type. After that, we move into module F, which is individual batch approval after module B. So we do that with only one of our clients at the moment, where they have a module B certificate. And then every boat built to that module B certificate would have its own module F certificate, an individual certificate for that boat. So effectively, it's a belt and braces approach. They've got one that says this is how we're going to build the boat, and then we go along as a module F survey and look at each boat coming off that production line to determine whether it remains in compliance. So it's more of a sort of belt and braces approach from the manufacturer. Module G is a full certification of an individual boat, so the same assessment as module B, but instead of the design type, it's that boat that gets the certificate. So we see that occasionally. Recently, we've had a couple of ribs go off to Australia, where they demand individual certification for the boat. So we've gone in and done a module G on top of the module B certification that the design type has. And modules D, E, and H are approvals based on audits of quality systems.
Baz, I've got a question from Will. Can I let him up?
Hi, Baz. What seems to be coming up quite a lot for workboats is the construction standard not being approved or acceptably to a certifying authority, because a lot of module A, A1, etc., and the certifying authorities requiring B or above assessment. So can we go back and do a post-construction assessment to uprate module A, A1 to a B or above? Is that possible? If we want to get a,
so we can't uprate it to a B, but we can issue a post-construction assessment, which is full certification of the individual boat. So those are the three, effectively, I think, that the MCA would probably accept if it's gone through A or A1, because it is the individual boat being certified to the full scope of the RCD going forwards. So if you've got a module A or A1, the option is to go through the PCA route to get a certificate which details, yes, it details the black water systems, the electrical systems, stability, but it also would detail the structural side as well going forwards.
And presumably to do that, you need all the drawings and construction data. So if the business has gone out of business, there's not much hope for that, presumably.
Yeah, and this is probably where a discussion with the MCA needs to be had at some point. So we've seen an increase of post-construction assessments coming through. And just as you know, Will, that if the manufacturer's gone out of business and we don't have drawings under the Recreational Craft Directive or regulations, we are permitted to use the 5 years history of safe operation as per MGN 280 and the colour codes, to say that we haven't been able to do a structural assessment, but the structure of the boat looks sound. It's been in operation in the similar type of waters, and we have a declaration that comes in from the owner to say, yes, I've been operating this boat for this amount of time in these types of waters, and we would use that to determine satisfactory structural assessment against the essential safety requirements. It's the next question from there is that acceptable to the MCA? And we haven't had anything come back, to be honest, at the moment from that.
Okay, so it's not a dead cert if we get a post-construction assessment that we get through the workboat code.
Not in my opinion would it be a dead cert, but as I said, we've done a few of those, and I've not heard any feedback from the owners to say that they've not been successful in gaining workboat certification.
Thanks, Baz.
So continuing on the RCD and commercial craft, so some nations, France in particular, require a specific RCD certificate with that boat's WIN number before going down the commercial certification for it. I think it's all fair to say, I know the MCA really don't trust the RCD. Other bodies do. It may not be perfect, but it is the largest boat certification scheme in the world, and it obliges certifiers to be accredited. So we're audited on a regular basis for our procedures, our knowledge, our record keeping, and the work that we do. And we're audited not only from an office perspective, but practical assessments as well, going forwards. So it may not be perfect, but as I said, it is the largest boat certification scheme, and we are accredited and audited, I'm from experience, significantly more than a certifying authority is as well, unfortunately. Linking a specific boat to a certifier sets a clear line of responsibility for commercial moderators. So effectively, by issuing a certificate with that WIN number on it, there is a body taking responsibility for the safety of that vessel at that time going forwards.
One more question from the room here for you.
Yeah.
The RCD, as you've put it there, and standardization of, I come across it quite often where it's quoted as the build design statutory requirement for large powered diesel engines on small boats, i.e. to me tenders, but they're 10 or 12 meters, with over 130 kilowatts operating power, so therefore they need an individual EIAPP by MARPOL. But it gets quoted back to me quite often. So it is built under RCD. That's what we're using as our standard. So where does that come into the MARPOL regs, especially in that specific case?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first part of that question again? It was quite hard to catch.
Tenders, diesel engines at sea, MARPOL, above 130 kilowatts, require you to have an EIAPP.
Yeah.
Some builders quote that they're using the Recreational Craft Directive and their standards as the reason why they don't have to provide. So which one has primacy over the two?
That is a question. Can I come back to you on that one if that's okay? Whoever asked that question. Mike, can you, if I record that down, can I write that back out to you once I've had a chance to look into
Yeah,
that?
sure. Yeah,
Thank
of
you.
course.
I've got the question on that. So then just finally, final slide for me. MCO does not require individual, i.e. not type approval, RCD certification book coding, but should it? And then I'll happily take any other questions that you guys have in terms of what we've covered, or any other questions you see that you come up with around the RCD. Apologies if I can't answer all of them. I tend to like to give a very accurate answer. So if I'm not quite sure, I'd research and then come back to Mike to hopefully circulate the answers. But I will do my best to try and answer them now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Baz. Right, okay, any questions? There's sort of lots of anxious nods around the room, and anybody online, anything you want to ask or know? Say again.
Be surprised if I said I didn't have any.
No, well, quite. I appreciate this is a bit of a hot potato, isn't it?
So I've got two.
Just hang on a second. Turn the microphone around. Okay, this is Graham coming to you, Baz.
So just seeking some clarification on the fitment of vintage engines in new build narrowboats.
Sorry, I didn't catch that question either.
Okay, so
Mike, are you able to repeat the question? Have you?
The fitting of engines,
vintage engines
fitting of vintage engines in narrowboats,
in new build narrowboats.
in new built
Old engines.
narrowboats. Oh, yeah, old engines in new boats.
Old engines and new boats. Effectively, then it's still the vessel that needs to comply, and the engine would need to comply, unfortunately. So you're talking about all the emission standards plus all the fitting standards that go with it as well.
Okay, that's clear.
And the second question, 2015 boat sold as a sail away, or partially lined sail away with an engine, been refitted or fitted by the owner, now on brokerage, and there are problems with certification, both from an original build point of view, where no documentation was issued in 2015, and no documentation covering the fitting out since it was sold. Does that make sense?
Did you pick that up, Baz?
I think I got some of that. So 2015 sail away, which has been completed, but partially built, but completed by the owner.
Yeah.
And there's no paperwork that's come with the original hull. Is that correct?
So the builder provided no documentation, no CE mark, even to an Annex 3 point. But then there's no final documentation because it's been owner fitted. It's now on brokerage, and questions are now being asked about its documentation.
Yeah, so I mean, it's being put onto the market, so it would require to be UKCA marked if it's in the UK. It is a common scenario that we see, especially on the inland waterways vessels, and it would need to go through a post-construction assessment to be put onto the market.
Okay, that's clear. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, another one. Question here from David.
Baz, quick question, following on from Graham's question there regarding PCA on a new build or relatively new build. What's the likely cost to a boat owner to put a 55 narrow through a PCA?
It varies depending on okay, so I tend not to like saying manufacturer's name. So the most common one that we see is a Collingwood come forward, and it depends on, so they provide an owner's manual, a declaration of conformity, and they are fitted out to various different levels. So depending on the type of fit out, we would either do, and again, it comes down to that proportionality. If the only thing that's been amended from the original boat that was supplied and to the boat that's being put onto the market later at a later point is the LPG system, then that's the only thing would come through to inspect. if it was the LPG system, with Collingwood, we know there are some other issues that we'd need to go through as well. But it's proportional depending forward. So it would be anywhere between £750 through to £3,500 to £4,000, depending on the level of PCA, the amount of work that was required.
Any other questions? Baz, that's been very helpful. Anybody else want to raise anything? So, a question that you can't answer, but I want to ask it anyway. I have got a chat coming actually, but let me ask the question. You said earlier we are now, or the UK government is now mirroring what's going on in Europe. Do you see over the next 5 years us moving away, developing our own different standard, if you like?
I can see that there are certain sectors of industry that may benefit from it. And whilst we're talking about the inland waterways, that is probably the sector that would benefit the most from moving away and having standards specifically or areas of regulation specifically designed for the industry that we have in the UK. For boats that can go across the channel or easily go across the channel, I think we're going to be looking to mirror those regulations for some time. Certainly we're continuing to harmonise the same standards that the EU are. We're not really diverging very much at all. We're not diverging at all from anything Europe's done so far. The only sector, as I said, in the next 5 years, I can see that may benefit from it would be the inland waterways. So category D vessels that may not necessarily be exported.
Okay, and there's a question on screen you might be able to see from Chris Holmes. You can see that. A sailaway fitted by the owner who has owned it for over 5 years, does it require certification?
Yes. So if it's a sailaway and he didn't build it, then he's completed the craft. So he should have an annex or show an Annex 3 declaration from the original hull builder. And then as he's the one if the owner then has completed the vessel and is putting it onto the market, even after the 5 years, he's the responsible person effectively, and it needs to be certificated.
Is there a year when that applies from?
Is there a year when that applies from, we're being asked?
Boats that fall under the scope, yes. So 1998.
98. 1998. Oh, hang on, we've got some conflicting information here. So can we just hear Graham's question?
My understanding is the 5-year rule applies through 2018, so RCD1, and post 2018, so RCD2, the 5-year rule does not apply, and therefore PCA is required. But so clarification on that would be really good.
Did you get that, Baz?
Sort of. I had the 2018 and RCD2. So the 5-year rule was for home-built craft. So if you haven't built the craft, so the example I was given was that if it's a sail away, then someone else has built the hull and you've completed it, but you're still the responsible person for putting it onto the market.
Did that answer your question?
Well, home-built craft, okay, my could be into one day at this rate. My understanding of home-built craft is it can still be classified as home-built if someone built the hull, the shell, and have certified it. Home-built can still include the use of subcontractors to perform expert work, such as you cannot install LPG unless you get a safe, so you have to subcontract that unless you get a safe to install. And that's still legitimate under home-built regulations. So yeah, like I said, it could be forever, but it's a woolly area, but it's really hurting people who are now bringing sailways to the second market after buying and building. So I think as an industry, we need to be really clear on what is required. Because the brokers are being given, I know for a fact it happened this week, the brokers are being given information that contradicts.
So where are the brokers getting that contradictory information from?
I think it's important that we stick to the kind of the terminology that is within the directive, because that's where we get driven by. So when we talk about a sail away, that means a manufacturer has partly completed the boat. So it'd be an Annex 3 boat, has sold it to somebody else who has completed the boat. We wouldn't consider that to be a home built boat, because a sail away comes with a declaration by the manufacturer of that partly completed watercrafts. So there's effectively two components to it. A home build wouldn't receive or shouldn't receive an Annex 3 declaration, because they're determining that they've built or are responsible for the whole vessel. That's where the home build comes into it. So a partly completed watercraft or a sail away with an Annex 3 declaration, yes, if you put it onto the market, it would need to be completed through the certification process.
And the home build doesn't.
Again, that's changed through the RCD 1 and 2, as the gentleman said earlier on.
Okay, so that's complicated.
Yeah, yeah. Right, any more for any more? Well, Baz, that caught you on the spot, didn't it? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate
And I'll answer the gentleman's question about the 13 kilowatt ENR and tender engines.
Much appreciated. So I think if there's nothing more, we'll bid you farewell. Thank you very much for dropping in at short notice. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
We'll catch up with you soon. Cheers, Baz.